Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and today we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And what a tumultuous 7 days it's been. We'll get into that in our first couple of questions, but we'll begin, as we do each week, by sharing where we get our questions. I often get asked this that I cover here on the Roundup. I get the questions from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And that's a weekly newsletter. Comes out Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, if you're subscribed to the email version. And you can do that at our website at or actually just smieconsulting.org/subscribe. You can fill out your details under the subscribe link and get it emailed to your inbox every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And we barely ever skip a week except for the holidays around Christmas, New Year, and maybe once when I'm on vacation for a couple weeks in the summer. So email version of the latest newsletter is in the chat now for your use, as well as we have a LinkedIn version. The LinkedIn version is available at about the same time, comes out about 30 minutes earlier than the email version, and that is on LinkedIn. The link to this week's LinkedIn version is now in the chat as well. But now I'm very humbled and proud to say that at the same time. Can you be humble and proud at the same time? Well, anyway, I'm very humbled that over now, between those two versions, the email and the LinkedIn version, we have over 2,400 subscribers that are getting our newsletter content each Monday morning delivered to them for their international edification. And those topics we cover in the newsletter, there's a few different sections. Social media section that covers anything really digital online, social media platforms, obviously, online tools, new white papers, digital reports, blogs, any upcoming webinars, those will be covered. AI topics, those will be covered in that social media section. Then we have big picture issues of what's happening in the U.S. today, news stories that are coming out that impact what we do in international education. Then a solutions central area where we talk about some potential solutions in that different institutions or countries are trying. And then we have a global roundup that goes into some of the highlights of what international ed stories are top of the list around the world, some of the key destination markets. So that's where we get our information. Those are our hot takes on the topics of the day that we cover each week in the newsletter. And then we see each week some certain themes developing around news stories. If there's a series on a couple of related topics, we'll put a question together on that. And that's where we come up with 3 questions each Wednesday that we cover here live on the Roundup. And again, those that don't watch live, we know that's the greater majority of you. There are over 4,200 downloads of our podcast over the years, over 300 episodes. Very proud of what the podcast version of what we're doing live here is able to get to you, and that's the audio only version. There's the watch on demand on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube whenever you like to see past versions of these roundups. So let's get right into our first question of the day. And that is, are future international students still bullish on the United States? Now, from the outside looking in, or the inside looking out, perhaps is a better way to start this conversation, we would be forgiven in the U.S. for thinking that why would international students want to come here now with who we have in the White House and with the anti-immigrant harsh talk on anything non-U.S. that is in this country. We had hoped the Doge Bros were going to keep on Trump's good side, and we know Ramaswamy kind of left the scene before the Doge scene before for the inauguration, and is now contemplating a run for governor in Ohio. We know that Elon Musk has certainly been very upfront with Trump and almost hand in hand with Trump in a lot of what he's trying to do in terms of getting rid of waste in the government, and that's long been a goal of many administrations, but we're going about it in a very different way in the Trump administration, that's for sure. So what the story that we're going to cover with you today is a lead from the Pie on IDP. IDP released a new survey, and they do this regularly. It's called Emerging Futures. It had been called Emerging Futures. It might be called something different now. They do change it fairly frequently. But the new research was conducted by IDP Education in February of 2025. So this is after the inauguration, not after the election. So this is fairly current information. And that 26%, and that's a fairly small sample size, 1,000 students from 43 countries. But the headline of that survey was 52% of respondents indicated that their perception of the U.S. had improved following the election. So there may be some of the actions that have happened since the inauguration, certainly the upcoming travel bans that are going to be put in place probably Friday, have 3 different phases to them, or 3 different colors to them: red, orange, and yellow. Or yellow and orange. So we'll see what that looks like. That's going to be a big topic, I'm sure, next week once the news stories percolate to the top of our feeds. But this IDP survey certainly kind of goes against the grain in terms of how we in the U.S. and the international ed community might be feeling about how our overseas students view the U.S. now with Trump in the White House. And I mentioned this last week, and I'll mention it each week until I actually do my presentation. But at the WIEC conference in DC, April 8th and 9th, I'll be presenting a keynote on how the U.S. higher ed, how international education specifically is responding to the chaos theory approach to governance that the Trump administration has ramped up even more, probably what they did in their first administration, first couple of months on. They put that on steroids for version 2.0 with all the executive orders and the severity of some of the actions that they're taking with DOGE and the cuts that they've made to USAID, to eliminating the foreign language program in the Department of Education as part of their cutting half the staff there. There are going to be more legal challenges in the next 4 years than I think we've ever seen to any presidential actions that have been taken. So it seems like almost everything that gets thrown out is being challenged. It's a matter of, can we cover all our bases here, and are we getting the most important ones covered and letting the other ones that may be important to us in some way or shape or form but less valuable, are we going to be able to get them all or challenge them all? And certainly there'll be challenges to the travel bans that'll be coming up, and one thing we all need to do in our daily lives, and it's hard not to get emotionally invested in what's happening, and we'll talk more about that in question 2 in terms of our survival. But with regard to how students are viewing, they're still our bread and butter. That's the reason we exist. Not only our current students, that we got to make sure we're informing correctly about what they can and can't do, encouraging them to be cautious, to not get overly involved in political action that might have stances that could be considered against the United States interests or supporting terrorism in any way. These are the sad realities that our current students are having to face day to day, and worrying about ICE raids and all these other things. Where you live in the country will probably have a lot to do with how much this impacts you. Sad to say, if you're in a red state, it's probably going to be less of an issue than if you're in a blue state or work at a university in a prominent university in a blue state. There's probably going to be less cover for you, sadly. But for future students, as they look at us, they still, as Simon Emmett points out in his comments related to this latest survey, he says, in recent IDP education research, we've seen evidence that the U.S. is benefiting from evolving policy environments in other leading markets like Canada and Australia. And this is what we need to keep our perspective on. And that, he says, as other markets become more unpredictable, international students are more willing to invest in the high quality and reputable education available in the United States. Given this, there's an opportunity for the U.S. international education community to come together and highlight the wealth of opportunities available to students in the market. Anyone who was in this business, in international education back in late 2016, early 2017, you will remember you are welcome here. We all did our videos, most of us did videos supporting our international students, supporting future international students that were looking at our college campuses. And that resonated well. That had an impact. There were 200-300 colleges or more that did these videos or showed support in one way, shape, or form for their international students under the "You Are Welcome Here" hashtag. We need something like that again. Because as much as the government policies seem to be, and certainly rhetoric seems to be antagonistic and antithetical to everything we're trying to do in international education on our campuses, the end result is on our campuses, our students are treated well. Our students have positive experiences. Our students graduate with fantastic job offers who have experiences that they take in their 4 years, 2 years, whatever the length of their degree is, to then shape who they are as people, shape their overall impression of the United States, and lead to their favorable ratings towards us as institutions and as our country as a whole. And as many of my colleagues have said to former students, hey, not everyone likes our president, but we love our country. And we love our country for what it can do for students from abroad, myself included. I was a former international student, came when I was 5 years old. I was an L2, intercompany transfer dependent, so I was in kindergarten, first grade. But I went through that whole immigrant journey. I was an international student, though, when I started. But this country is founded on the immigrants who have come to us, and it has made us the strong country we are. We've gotten away from a lot of the respect for that in the past few years, but we can't lose hold of that which makes us great. And that's why I think international students, when they only see the outside, the top level stuff, they don't see the chaos that's going on day to day in the government, sometimes in our government affairs offices, on our campuses, sometimes with ICE office communications with our international offices. There's all of that that's going on, but we got to step back and maintain perspective in terms of understanding what's going on the bigger picture, and being able to still sell who we are as a campus, as an institution, as as a country, and in terms of the opportunities that are available currently for international students. So the results show that international students are, by and large, still overwhelming majority, not overwhelming, the majority are still thinking favorably about the United States. Now, that's not universal. There are, that's just 52% indicated their perception has improved. It doesn't say how much was the same. I'm going to do some quick math here. So it does say 52% indicated perception of the U.S. has improved after the election. 26% reported it had declined. So that's not unlike some of the pre-election surveys we were seeing on who would overall who would be more favorable towards the U.S. if Trump won. We look at, so that's 52%. 26%, that's 78%, so 22% were unchanged. So 22%, 74%, almost 3/4, had exactly the same or better views of the United States after the elections. So, and that again, the study was done in February after inauguration. So there is some positive lights here. The one negative on this that you see was only 27% of Chinese students reported an improved perception. We don't see how many stayed the same or how many declined. It just said only 27% saw an improved perception. So that's was always going to be a trouble spot between India, or between China and the U.S. anyway. So not a real big surprise with that one. But I do want to share that story in the chat as well, so you have that for reference as we're going along here. So that's the first question of the day. The second one is where it's going to get personal here. It's going to get really personal. Those of you who've known me for more than a minute, and I talk about this regularly on my roundups, is Education USA is near and dear to my heart. In my first days as an international educator, my first boss, Dave Brewy at Marquette University, he made it clear that I needed to get to know these overseas advisors. That's what they were known back then in the 90s, before they became Education USA in 1999. Get to know these advisors. They're going to be your best friends in the business. And these advisors in over 170 countries, 450 offices around the world, are the heart and soul of the Education USA network. I had the great fortune. Every institution I've ever worked, Education USA has been a central element of our overall international student recruitment strategies. I had the chance for 6.5 years to work in DC for Education USA at the Institute of International Education. Now, IIE, who many of you know, they produce the Open Doors every year, but they manage literally hundreds of scholarship programs, both public and private, government and non-government scholarship programs. And they have managed, for a lot of countries, they manage the Fulbright program, both particularly for inbound Fulbright students. So, and they also have a core team that when I started was 2 people in DC, and expanded to I think 6 or 7, maybe more, that were working on the Education USA program for State Department and ECA. What Trump has done and DOJ has done with their government efficiency posts, all the executive orders that they've thrown out there, one of those was a freeze on government funding for 60 days or so, something to that effect. That funding impacts programs, government programs, State Department programs that are international ed related. That includes Fulbright, that includes Gilman, includes Humphrey Fellowships, includes all sorts of government-sponsored scholarships that international students have access to come here, and that our students, U.S. students, have access to study abroad. With those programs' funding being cut, or not cut, I should say, halted as the review process is underway, that has left current awardees that are already overseas or already on our campuses basically without funding. That has caused obviously serious ramifications. Campuses that host Fulbrighters on your campus, you've been dealing with these issues, you know this. And the answer of the question here, will our profession survive the next 4 years? The mental state of most of us in our field has been challenged significantly in the last few weeks since the election, and the actions that have come post inauguration have certainly justified our fears in a large extent because of the impact that it is having on those we care about. Part of the cuts, not cuts again, it's not official cuts, it's part of the freeze that the government has put in place on these funds, impacts the awardees of these funds. And IIE, managing all these programs, gets funding from state to run Fulbright, to do Open Doors, to run Education USA programming in the US, coordinating activities with the REACs. The IIE folks in DC are also the employers for all the REACs, the 13, 14 REACs around the world. So their activities are being curtailed because IIE does not have the funds, because the tap has been turned off by the government to run those programs that they've been commissioned with or have signed contracts with. The hope is that after this review period is done, those funds will be restored and released, because they are ultra valuable programs that to U.S. public diplomacy, how we're viewed overseas, opportunities that students have to come here, opportunities for our students to go abroad and do life-changing work. If that ever was to get cut, I know, or eliminated, I know there would be significant consequences in our industry. not only to the folks that I've worked with at Education USA in DC, many of which I know, that have been furloughed, to the REACTs out in the field whose activities are being curtailed, to the longer term impact of what could happen next. That's always, we go to our worst fears, right? So with Education USA, how dare you, to the government? That is my my stance on this program, on how dare you halt funding that impacts so many lives. Now, that being said, the advisors on the ground are employed locally by the embassies, by Fulbright commissions, by local universities. They often wear many other hats, and advisor is just one of many hats they wear. So their jobs right now aren't necessarily in jeopardy, but those that manage the Education USA network writ large through IIE, their jobs are in jeopardy right now. Many have been furloughed. All but 2 in the DC office have been furloughed. So this organization impacts millions of students every year through web, social, in-person, virtual advising efforts that they do around the globe in every country that they have offices. They are active, and even in 3 countries where they don't have offices, in Iran, in Syria, and I think in Lebanon now, I'm not sure. But anyway, there are countries where we don't have advisors physically that are still been doing virtual work for over a decade, to support Education USA's efforts to build bridges with students in those countries. How dare the government do that? Yes, it's a small program in a much larger budget that is inconsequential financially to what DOGE is trying to do with the government. We know that USAID had been halted. All activities have been halted, and staff have been all let go. There have been thankfully, successful court challenges to reinstate staff in DC. But there's still the question of the funding that's been sent overseas in the past, and evaluating whether that's fallen into the wrong hands. And yes, there is corruption in how those dollars have been used over the years, no doubt, because of some of the places it went. They have unbelievably bad records of corruption and misuse of funds. So there's no doubt that funds have been misused, and should they still be misused in the future? Obviously not. But it's a very heavy-handed way to go about identifying the problem countries, the problem areas, and making the cuts accordingly, rather than ending careers for dozens of individuals that have worked and put their heart and soul into USAID for decades. So will our profession survive? We've seen attacks to the attack or the removal of former, and this is another thing, former international student who got permanent residency at Columbia, former grad student, is now no longer a student there, but he was still an activist on and around campus. So his deportation is causing a lot of concern. But we talked about this last week, about free speech and limits of free speech, and where do lines get drawn, and should international students, new international students, any current international students, if there are future protests on our campuses, would the recommendation of the international office be to, yes, go ahead, get involved, whatever you want? Of course it won't. We should not be putting our students in a situation where they could potentially be removed. And the talk about using AI to identify those that were involved in protests over the last year and a half, since October 7th, 23. That is a scary thing, because is it going to be able to accurately identify all students when they were wearing masks, and those who weren't covered? Will they be punished first? And how will they make sure that what they've said or showed support for was actually terrorism and not just support for the Palestinian people, which 99% of those who were involved in these protests, I'm sure, were expressing those concerns, not support for Hamas. Obviously, if you are, you don't belong in this country, and yes, you should leave, and you will be removed, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But to lump in everybody who participated in those protests who doesn't have who isn't a permanent resident, that is overstepping. because you have no proof that what they're actually saying and doing is supporting Hamas. And that is a limit that they have, and they do not have unfettered rights to that a citizen has in this U.S. In the United States. They can be removed. They can be removed if they commit crimes. If they've committed of drunk driving, there are campuses across this country that have seen international students get deported if they were convicted of drunk driving. That is something that they don't have a free pass. It's not unlimited. Being in the country is, as an international student, is a privilege. Yes, we welcome them. We do everything we can to support them, but we can't tell them that it's okay to commit crimes in this country, because that is grounds for removal. And I'm okay with that. But, very big but, we cannot have our students feel threatened by our government. We have to protect our students. It's our jobs. And kudos to those institutions that are fighting the good fight, not releasing information. There are FERPA implications here. Obviously, there are privacy rights that they do have, that students have, regardless of status. And that is something that affects our DACA students, it affects our international students, but it's the impressions that we get. But I always talk about this in my 6 Ps, and the first P is perspective. 6 Ps of Strategic International Enrollment Management. For those not familiar, it's a series of articles I did 3 or 4 years ago during the pandemic that I did for IDP, for U.S. audiences, that have now been put into a book chapter. Was released last May, called Entry Points to U.S. Education, and chapter 14 is my 6 Ps. And the first P is of Strategic International Enrollment Management is perspective. And even though we're getting down in the weeds here, we're feeling under threat every day. Seems like there's something new coming at us. Will our profession survive? We will if we maintain our heads while all those around us are losing theirs. And we do that by keeping perspective on what's happening in the wider world. What's happening in the wider world that we can use as advantages to still promote the U.S. as an enviable destination for international students. You know, it's not going to be the enviable destination for those that want to come and protest against the government policy in Palestine, in Gaza. It's not going to be a place where you can come and break laws and do that without fear of consequence. That's not who we are as a nation. We're a nation of laws. And when those laws are violated, there are consequences. And if you're an international student, the consequences are you can be removed if you break the law and are convicted. So we need to keep that focus. We need to keep that perspective on how we're being viewed by students overseas. And in certain markets, we know that there's going to be a rebound coming in India, maybe not this fall, but for spring of 26. They're expecting a strong rebound from the student market there. We know in certain markets there are still pockets in China. Our next question is, do we in the West really understand China's goals? One of the goals that they have is expansion, expansion, expansion. They are expanding their push for consumer purchases in China. They're expanding their push amongst educational institutions to develop more partnerships. They're expanding the number of students that are coming on scholarships through their Belt and Road initiatives. All of that is part of what China's doing. And part of those partnerships can still involve the U.S. Despite the antagonism between China and the U.S. in recent years, those academic partnerships can still survive. And every one of us that reposts or shames, I won't say reposts, gives oxygen to the Republican bill in the House about banning student visas issuance to students in China. Don't give it the oxygen. It's not going to get passed. It's not going to become law. The more we feed into it, the more we rile up our students, the more we rile up ourselves. We need to focus on the bigger picture. Things like that will never pass. There may be other restrictions put in place. We know that there's the list of 43 countries or so that are going to be in this red, yellow, orange listing because they don't have procedures in place to share information about their citizens with us in terms of criminal records for those that were applying for visas. So that's why this system is in place. It's a much broader list. There are a couple, 3, 4, 5 countries on that list that are concerning for international educators. There were exemptions carved out in the first ones for 8 years ago. There may well be for this one as well. But we know it's the overall impression, and the overall impression is the government is not welcoming visitors from these countries. The challenge is we have to interpret that. And the reasoning for that is those countries aren't sharing adequate data with us on their citizens who are applying for visas to our country. That's why that we're potentially restricting access for visas for those individuals that might be coming to the United States. So, will our profession survive? A couple questions wrapped up in one here. It will if we keep our heads about us. There's going to be a lot more that's going to come down the pipe, and we need support groups. We need to be there for each other. We need to be supporting our colleagues on our campuses. So being there for our students, obviously, is our first priority, but it's draining. It's taking every ounce of energy we have to keep from breaking down sometimes. I get it. I'm there with you. But we have to keep our eyes on the bigger prize, and that is the students that are coming and our job and our responsibility to serve them well to the best of our ability. Now, the final question I'll just touch on very quickly, and that is related to China and what they're doing. China is, we've talked often on this channel about China's Belt and Road Initiative and what that means. I don't think a lot of us might be familiar with what it is, but the extent to which it impacts their higher ed structure and the knock-on effects on their soft power influence, it's their equivalent of the Belt and Road, their equivalent of USAID, but on steroids. They've spent trillions in the last decade, 2 decades on the Belt and Road Initiative through scholarships, through investment projects that where they basically build infrastructure sites in various countries, ports, airports, train lines, buildings of whatever sort for different countries, and then they charge reasonable loan, or the countries don't get them for free. They owe the Chinese government or the contractors that are building these facilities. Now some of those loans are coming due, and there's a lot of African countries that aren't too happy with having to make all these repayments, and it's adding up, and they're having to make some very tough decisions as well. But China always has a plan, whereas even Trump said this the other day. We plan for a quarter in advance. China plans for 5 to 10 years in advance, at least. So there's some articles here this week they'll be sharing in the chat about what they've done with Belt and Road Initiative, what they're doing with their new partnership initiatives that the government is encouraging their institutions to take advantage of, and then we're worrying about very simple things that. In terms of what we're doing for the next quarter or the next intake. Whereas in China, they're planning multiple years, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead to achieve their national goals. Something to be learned and perspective again on what that means for us in the West. But that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for bearing with me as we go through some really tough conversations, but the challenge will be to maintain a level head and to not lose faith in why you do what you do, and hopefully you do have a faith that you believe in, and that can be a rock and some solace for you in these tough times. But there will be brighter days, and that's something we all know is coming. So